Listen, I'm not saying the Vrelnath are bad at parenting. I'm just saying that when your idea of childcare involves strapping your offspring into a temperature-controlled pod and piping in educational broadcasts for 16 hours a day, maybe you shouldn't be surprised when your kids turn into little sociopaths who think sharing is a structural weakness. But humans? Oh, humans are a whole different flavor of insane. Let me tell you about Chief Engineer Maya Reeves, who somehow managed to become the unofficial babysitter for an entire litter of predator cubs on a deep space freight hauler called the Meridian's Grace. And, before you ask, no, this wasn't in her job description. Yes, she volunteered anyway, because humans are, as a species, completely unhinged when it comes to anything small and fuzzy. The cubs in question belonged to Captain Skarath, a Keshvar warrior who stood 8 feet tall, had claws that could punch through reinforced steel, and possessed a bite force that made crocodiles look like enthusiastic gummy bears. The Keshvar were apex predators from a death world that made Australia look like a petting zoo. They're cubs, born with fully functional teeth and an instinct to hunt that kicked in before they could walk properly. Adorable, right? Well, Maya certainly thought so. The trouble started 3 cycles into their cargo run to the outer colonies. Captain Skarath had brought his 4 cubs aboard because, apparently, Keshvar maternity pods were experiencing some kind of galaxy-wide recall. Something about a firmware update that accidentally told the cubs they were prey animals. Very unfortunate. Lots of therapy would be needed. So there was Skarath, trying to run a tight ship while simultaneously preventing his offspring from treating the crew like a buffet sampler. The cubs, Raksik, Thessal, Noru, and little Vika, were each about the size of a large dog, covered in slate-gray fur with distinctive striping, and possessed eyes that could track a fly across a football field in the dark. They were also bored out of their tiny predator minds. Keshvar cubs were supposed to spend their developmental phase learning to hunt, practicing ambush techniques, and generally engaging in activities that would make most species file restraining orders. Instead, they were stuck on a cargo ship where the most exciting thing that happened was occasionally watching asteroids drift by on the view screens. Captain Skarath was at his wits' end. The cubs had already managed to hunt 3 maintenance drones, stage an ambush on the second officer that resulted in a sprained ankle, and somehow organize a coordinated raid on the galley that left the Vrelnath cook gibbering about the small-toothed devils for 2 days straight. Enter Maya Reeves, who made the fatal mistake of walking past the cubs' quarters with a toolkit in hand. "You there, human," Skarath rumbled, his universal translator rendering his growl into something almost polite. "You are good with machinery, yes?" Maya paused, adjusting her oil-stained jumpsuit. "I mean, I'm the chief engineer, so I'd hope so. Why?" Skarath's ears flattened, a sign of deep distress in his species. "I require assistance. My cubs are restless. They require stimulation, mental engagement. The crew psychologist suggested enrichment activities, but I do not understand what this means. On my world, we would simply release them into the forest to chase prey analogs until exhausted." "Right, but we're in space, and I'm pretty sure the other crew members don't want to be prey analogs. This is the problem, yes." Maya glanced past him into the quarters. 4 pairs of luminous amber eyes stared back at her with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for missile targeting systems. Raksik, the largest, had his tail swishing back and forth like a metronome. Thessal was crouched low, clearly calculating jump trajectories. Noru appeared to be vibrating with suppressed energy, and Vika, the smallest, was making a high-pitched chittering sound that Maya's pattern recognition software, also known as her brain, immediately identified as excitement. Any reasonable person would have politely declined and continued on their way to fix whatever fuel line was currently deciding to leak in violation of physics and common sense. Maya, being human, said, "I'm heading down to Engineering Bay 3 to clean out some fuel lines. Want me to take them along?" Skarath's expression, translated through his alien features, conveyed roughly the same thing as a drowning man being thrown a life preserver. "You would do this?" "Sure. I could use the company. Fair warning, though, fuel line maintenance is probably the most boring job on the ship. Human Maya, my cubs have spent the last 2 hours staring at a wall because they believe they saw it move. Your task will be a festival of stimulation by comparison. And that's how Maya ended up in Engineering Bay 3 with 4 apex predator cubs, helping her perform routine maintenance. The bay itself was a cramped space filled with exposed piping, fuel pumps, and enough warning labels to give a safety inspector nightmares. The main fuel lines ran along the floor and walls, requiring someone to essentially crawl around with cleaning solutions and diagnostic tools, making sure nothing was corroding or developing microfractures. It was tedious, grimy work. Maya loved it. She spread out her toolkit and turned to address her new assistants. Okay, listen up. The rules are simple. Don't bite anything that's glowing, don't claw anything that's hissing, and absolutely, under no circumstances, drink the fuel. It will not make you stronger, faster, or better at hunting. It will make you very, very sick. And then I'll have to explain to your father why his cubs are hallucinating about space whales. 4 tails flicked in what Maya chose to interpret as agreement. Great. Now, I'm going to start with this section here. She knelt down beside a particularly grimy stretch of fuel line and pulled out her cleaning solution. This is going to take a while, so feel free to explore. Just stay where I can see you. The cubs immediately dispersed like furry little surveillance drones, sniffing at equipment, pawing at tool containers, and generally investigating their new environment with the kind of thorough attention that would make intelligence agencies jealous. Maya got to work, spraying down the fuel line and scrubbing away the accumulated grime. It was mindless, repetitive work, the kind where your hands knew what to do and your brain could drift off somewhere else. She hummed tunelessly, occasionally talking to herself the way engineers do when they've spent too much time alone with machinery. Come on, you stubborn piece of, there we go. How did you even get this dirty? We literally cleaned you 3 months ago. Are you secretly throwing parties when we're not looking? Inviting your fuel line friends over for ragers? A small chittering sound came from her left. Maya glanced over to find Vika, the smallest cub, sitting exactly 3 feet away, tail wrapped neatly around her paws, watching Maya work with laser focus. Hey there, small fry. Find something interesting? Vika's ears twitched, her head tilted slightly, tracking Maya's hand movements. Ah, I see. You're studying my technique. Excellent. The key to fuel line maintenance is patience and a complete disregard for getting your clothes clean. Also, a willingness to curse at inanimate objects. Very important. Maya went back to her work. Within minutes, Raksik had joined his sister, sitting on Maya's right side, his tail doing the same slow, synchronized swish as Vika's. Then Thessal appeared, settling in behind Maya. Finally, Noru completed the formation, sitting just in front of where Maya was working. 4 cubs, 4 positions, all sitting perfectly still except for their tails, which moved in an eerily synchronized rhythm. It was both adorable and vaguely unsettling. Are you guys guarding me? Maya asked. Is that what's happening here? Because I appreciate the sentiment, but the biggest threat in this room is probably me accidentally breathing in too much degreaser fumes. The tails continued their synchronized flicking. Right. Okay. Well, make yourselves comfortable, I guess. Maya continued working her way along the fuel line, cleaning each section with methodical care. The cubs followed, repositioning themselves to maintain their formation around her. Whenever she moved to a new section, they moved with her. When she paused to consult her diagnostic tablet, they paused. When she muttered creative profanity at a particularly stubborn piece of corrosion, their ears swiveled toward her in perfect unison. It was like having the world's most attentive, heavily armed audience. You know, Maya said, addressing the cubs as she worked, most species in the galaxy think humans are crazy for doing maintenance work like this. They've got automation, drones, self-cleaning systems. But you want to know a secret? 4 pairs of eyes focused on her with predatory intensity. I like getting my hands dirty. There's something satisfying about taking a system that's not working right and fixing it yourself. Feeling the grime come off, seeing the metal underneath shine, knowing that because you did this work, the ship's going to run better. It's honest work, you know? No politics, no complicated social dynamics. Just you, the machine, and the problem to solve. Raxic made a low rumbling sound, not quite a growl, more like a questioning hum. Plus, Maya continued, grinning, it drives the captain crazy that I insist on doing this stuff personally instead of delegating it. She keeps telling me that's what subordinates are for. But I didn't become an engineer to sit in an office filling out requisition forms. I became an engineer to fix things. She moved to the next section, and the cubs flowed with her like a furry, synchronized swimming team. Your dad seems like a good captain, by the way. Tough, but fair. I've served under worse. There was this one commander I had early in my career, Terrence Blackwood, absolute nightmare of a human being. Thought maintenance was beneath him. Treated the engineering crew like we were disposable. Tried to cut corners on safety checks to meet deadlines. Maya's expression darkened. Let's just say his ship developed a sudden, catastrophic malfunction that required him to be transferred to a desk job while a full investigation took place. Funny how that happened right after he ignored my repeated warnings about a coolant system defect. Almost like the universe has a sense of irony. Thessel's tail swished a bit faster, as if approving of this tale of workplace justice. Anyway, your dad actually listens when I tell him something's wrong. That's worth its weight in platinum, trust me. The work continued. Maya cleaned, inspected, made notes on her tablet, and kept up a running commentary that ranged from technical explanations of fuel systems to random observations about life in space, to the occasional digression into entirely unrelated topics. Did you know that Earth has entire ecosystems in its oceans that nobody's fully explored yet? We went to space before we mapped our own planet. That's very human when you think about it. See something mysterious in the distance, immediately try to reach it, completely ignore the mysterious stuff right next to us. The cubs listened. Their tails flicked in rhythm. My grandmother used to say that humans were born with wanderlust in our blood. She was a colony pioneer, first generation on Kepler 442b. Left Earth when she was 20, never looked back. She used to tell me stories about terraforming, about watching sunrises on a world where humans had no business surviving. She said the secret to happiness was finding work that made your hands tired and your heart satisfied. Maya paused, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of grease across her temple. I think she was right. There's something deeply satisfying about maintenance work. Everyone wants to be the person who invents the revolutionary new engine or discovers the faster-than-light drive. But somebody's got to keep the existing systems running. Somebody's got to care about the boring, repetitive work that keeps people alive. Vika chirped softly, pressing closer to Maya's side. Yeah, I know. I'm getting philosophical about fuel lines. That's what happens when you spend 6 months on a cargo hauler with nobody to talk to except the ship's computer. And trust me, she's not much for conversation. Her idea of small talk is reminding me about safety protocols. At some point, Maya realized she'd been working for 3 hours straight and hadn't heard a single sound from the cubs beyond the occasional chirp or hum. No fighting, no attempts to hunt the equipment, no chaos whatsoever. She sat back on her heels, stretching her back. The vertebrae cracked in sequence, and she groaned. You guys are surprisingly good at this. Most kids would have gotten bored after 5 minutes and started trying to eat the tools. Vika chose that moment to pad forward and gently headbutt Maya's knee, the Keshvar equivalent of a friendly greeting. Maya's heart immediately melted into a puddle of goo. She reached out slowly, letting Vika sniff her hand before very gently scratching behind the cub's ears. The fur was softer than she'd expected, like touching silk that happened to be wrapped around a very efficient killing machine. Vika leaned into the touch, purring like a diesel engine. Oh, you're absolutely lethal, aren't you? Deadly predator, apex hunter, definitely not enjoying the ear scratches. Nope, very fierce. One by one, the other cubs crept closer, demanding their share of attention. Maya found herself surrounded by purring, chirping predator cubs, all competing for prime petting position. Raksik draped himself across her lap, despite being almost too large for the gesture. Thessel pressed against her back, his purring vibrating through her spine. Noru sat on her feet, effectively pinning her in place. Okay. There's enough human to go around. Though I'm going to need to finish these fuel lines eventually, guys. Raksik, buddy, I love you, but you're lying on my wrench. Raksik responded by flopping over completely, exposing his belly, a gesture of absolute trust in Keshvar body language. Oh, come on. That's not fair. You know I can't resist the belly. You're playing dirty. She rubbed his stomach, and Raksik's purring increased to a volume that probably registered on seismic equipment. His back leg kicked involuntarily, exactly like a dog's, which Maya found both hilarious and endearing. Does your dad know you do this? Because I'm pretty sure this undermines your whole terrifying apex predator image. What would the other Keshvar say? Raksik, displaying the concern of his species for public opinion, continued to demand belly rubs. Maya eventually managed to extract herself from the pile of cubs and return to work. The fuel lines weren't going to clean themselves, and she'd already spent more time on cuddle breaks than was probably professional. Not that she regretted a second of it. The cubs resumed their positions around her, tails flicking in that mesmerizing synchronized pattern. Maya found the rhythm soothing, almost meditative. There was something profoundly peaceful about working in silence, except for the soft sounds of purring cubs and the occasional hiss of her cleaning solution against metal. You know what I like about you guys, Maya said, working on a particularly stubborn section of corrosion. You don't feel the need to fill every silence with chatter. Most humans are uncomfortable with quiet. We feel like we have to constantly talk, constantly explain ourselves, constantly justify our existence through noise. She scraped carefully at the corrosion, watching the buildup flake away to reveal clean metal underneath. But sometimes the best company is the kind that can just sit with you, be present without demanding anything, just existing together in the same space, doing the work that needs doing. Noru made a soft trilling sound that Maya interpreted as agreement. My first posting, I was on an exploration vessel called the Distant Horizon. Beautiful ship, state-of-the-art everything, and I hated every minute of it. Not because of the work was fine, but because everyone was always networking, always positioning themselves for the next promotion, always playing politics. She moved to the next section, and the cubs shuffled along with her. I transferred to cargo haulers because I wanted to actually do engineering instead of spending half my time in meetings. Best decision I ever made. Sure, the ships aren't as glamorous, and the pay's not as good, but I get to work with my hands. I get to solve real problems instead of theoretical ones. Maya paused, checking her tablet's diagnostic readings. Plus, cargo haulers don't usually come with predator cubs, but I'm counting that as a bonus. The hours slipped by. Maya worked through the entire length of fuel line in Bay 3, cleaning, inspecting, making minor repairs where necessary. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, the kind of muscle memory that came from years of doing the same tasks in dozens of different configurations. The cubs watched everything with unblinking attention. Occasionally one would shift position or make a small sound, but mostly they simply observed. Learning, perhaps. Or maybe just enjoying the companionship. Maya didn't presume to know what went on in the minds of alien predator cubs, but she appreciated their presence regardless. Almost done, she announced, tackling the final section of pipe. Just need to run a pressure test to make sure everything's sealed properly, and we're good. She pulled out her testing equipment and hooked it up to the fuel line. The gauge flickered, stabilized, and held steady. Perfect pressure, no leaks, all systems optimal. And that, my friends, is how you maintain a fuel system. Maya sat back, admiring her handiwork. The fuel lines gleamed, free of corrosion and buildup. Every connection was tight, every seal intact. It was beautiful in the way that only properly maintained machinery could be. By the time Captain Scareth came to collect his cubs, 6 hours after they'd started, he found Maya lying on the floor of Engineering Bay 3, completely covered in apex predator cubs, all of whom were purring loud enough to register on seismic sensors. The fuel lines gleamed, perfectly maintained. Maya's face bore the expression of someone who'd found their calling in life. Her jumpsuit was filthy. Her hair had escaped its tie and was sticking up in random directions, and she had grease smudged across her face like war paint. She looked absolutely content. "Human Maya," Scareth rumbled, his tone carefully neutral. "My cubs have not hunted you." "Nope," Maya said cheerfully, gently booping Noru on the nose. "We've been doing maintenance. They're excellent helpers, very attentive, though I think Thessel tried to organize an ambush on a coolant valve at one point, so we might need to work on his target identification skills." Scareth's ears went flat in what Maya was learning to recognize as profound confusion. They sat still? For 6 hours? Voluntarily? "Well, we took a snack break. I hope it's okay that I gave them some of my protein bars. They seem to enjoy them, even though Raksik ate the wrapper too. Is that going to be a problem? I probably should have asked first. My cubs do not sit still. My cubs organize hunting strategies against inanimate objects. My cubs have made 3 crew members request transfers. My cubs once stalked the ship's doctor for 2 hours because they decided she smelled interesting." Maya shrugged, carefully extracting herself from the pile of cubs. They protested with disappointed chirps, but allowed her to stand. "I don't know what to tell you, Captain. We just cleaned fuel lines and talked. Sometimes kids just need someone to listen to them ramble while doing boring tasks, makes them feel included." Scareth stared at his cubs, who were now reluctantly peeling themselves off the floor and padding toward their father. Their tails were still moving in that synchronized pattern, and they kept looking back at Maya like she was the most interesting thing in the galaxy. Vika, the smallest, made a plaintive sound that clearly meant she didn't want to leave. "You have somehow," Scareth said slowly, choosing his words with care, "done what the most advanced Keshvar child-rearing techniques could not achieve. You have made my cubs willingly engage in a sustained, peaceful activity that did not involve stalking, hunting, or terrorizing crew members. I mean, I did tell them not to drink the fuel. That probably helped establish clear boundaries. Human Maya, I must ask, would you be willing to provide this enrichment again? Perhaps regularly? I will compensate you for your time. Name your price." Maya grinned, wiping her hands on her already filthy jumpsuit. "Captain, I'd do it for free. Those fuel lines need checking every week anyway, and the company's way better than the time I spent 3 days alone in a maintenance shaft fixing a plasma relay while hallucinating from sleep deprivation. True story. By hour 40, I was convinced the relay was trying to communicate with me through Morse code." Scareth's expression suggested he was reassessing his understanding of human psychology. "You would voluntarily spend time with my cubs? Regularly? Without compensation? Captain, have you seen your cubs? They're adorable. Also, they're excellent listeners. They don't interrupt, and they haven't once suggested we restructure the maintenance schedule to be more efficient. That alone makes them better co-workers than half the engineers I've served with. And that's how Maya Reeves, chief engineer of the Meridian's Grace, became the galaxy's least likely but most effective babysitter for predator cubs who could theoretically tear her limb from limb, but instead chose to sit quietly and watch her clean fuel lines.